last minute medicine interview prep. I know the interview cycle is coming to a close, meaning that a lot of you guys have interviews this week, next week, or so on. But first of all, I'm just going to clarify who this video is for. This video is for people who don't have time for a full mock interview. They don't have time to, do some more research on a specific NHS hot topic. Rather, this video is just really about refining the skills, which I like to say don't require skills. So things which anyone can do to just take their interview to the slightly next level. Okay, with the disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about the first piece of last minute medicine interview advice, and that would be don't be shaky on legislation or things which you know to be 100% true. Now, I understand you don't want to come across in a way which is sort of cocky or arrogant or brash to your interviewer, but there's two different answers I'll exemplify to you using the same scenario. And this scenario is about life-saving treatment or refusing life-sustaining treatment. So we're going to revolve our answer around the fact, which if you don't know by now, you should know, but the fact that in the UK, adults with capacity have the 100% right to refuse treatment. Too many times in mock interviews, students have presented that fact to me in a way which doesn't actually sound confident that they know it's the case, they have the absolute right to refuse treatment. How you want to go about answering questions like this is present that law as an absolute truth, because it is, and then your nuance comes afterwards in how you interpret it. So for example, when there's a question about refusing life-sustaining treatment, there's two ways to answer it. The way which you should start with your answer is saying, in the UK, adults with capacity have the absolute right to refuse treatment. And the way you shouldn't begin your answer, we'll talk about how you build upon that afterwards, but the way you shouldn't begin your answer is what's the effect of, in the UK, you can refuse right to treatment, as long as your doctor allows it. You shouldn't answer your question that way because, for reasons I've talked about in previous videos, this type of mentality could lead to denying patients of their autonomy, which is illegal, right? Once you've presented that fact to be what you're going to revolve your answer around, when it's to do with life-sustaining treatment or, the lack of life-sustaining treatment, you're going to build upon your answer with the nuance. The nuance shouldn't be in the statement. The law doesn't change. The nuance comes afterwards, and things you need to take into account before, doctors or healthcare professionals go about removing life-sustaining treatment is this patient making an informed decision? So do they have all of the information at hand necessary to make this decision? Would you like to arrange a multidisciplinary team meeting with all of the professionals involved in their care to discuss maybe why it's the case that they don't want this life-sustaining treatment? How are you going to make sure you're not being discriminatory to religious beliefs, which might be the reason why they're denying this life-sustaining treatment? And also something really quick you can mention to do with questions like this is assessing capacity. Capacity is the ability to understand, retain, weigh up, and communicate a decision back to their doctor. So somewhere in your answer where you're meeting with a patient who's refusing life-sustaining treatment, you can mention you doing that either subtly or explicitly to them, just to ensure that they have capacity. So essentially what I'm getting at is be confident on the things you know, and then the nuance around it is where the discussion really is. If your interview station is 5 minutes on refusing life-sustaining treatment, I don't want you to just repeat back to the interviewer, or they have the absolute right to refuse treatment, or they have the absolute right to refuse treatment, and so on and so on. The nuance comes afterwards in the interpretation of that and just making sure that ultimately you're making the best decision for the patient. My second piece of advice, which is still in the sort of realm of the last one, is to structure your answers in a way which helps you down the line. So what I would recommend doing, if you're someone who might get a bit lost in your answers, is at the beginning of your answers, take a moment to think about it. Signpost which ethical issues this question might concern, so if it's to do with the 4 pillars, if it's to do with consent, if it's to do with, like we just mentioned, autonomy. And then once you've signpost these things at the start of your answer, it should help you down the line just in terms of the flow in which you answer the question. I found it really helpful to me personally. If that's not the structure you're working with, then you don't have to follow this piece of advice. It's just something which worked for me personally. And I understand you don't want to, I forgot the saying, what to do with the wheels, you don't want to remake, you don't want to remake the wheel, whatever it is. You don't want to do that, okay, before your interview. And I completely understand that. So again, any of these tips in this video that you don't want to follow, don't follow them, okay? But yeah, to summarize that question, you could benefit from signposting what ideas you want to talk about in the question before you talk about them. It just gave me a bit of clarity before I spoke to each their own. As for the next piece of advice, one you hear all the time, it's often overlooked. Sort out your technicalities the day before. I did a mock interview where someone crashed upon joining the call, which isn't great, but luckily they spotted that the day before and got it sorted for the next day, and they just knew that they weren't going to work off that laptop during the interview. Technicalities include more things, though, like you want to be in the room which has the best internet connection. You want the people who you live with to know that you're taking an interview at this time and to not disturb you. Sort out your clothes the day before, have good lighting. These are things which in theory shouldn't impact, how you're scored on each question, things like how good your lighting is, but you don't know what role this could play subconsciously to the interviewer, so just err on the side of caution and make sure everything's proper, everything looks professional before your interview. Now in terms of learning, because there's some people who, even as much as I tell them to, relax, whatever, and that it's better to go into the interview with a clear mind, they're just going to ignore me and want to do some type of work. So if you do want to do some type of work, okay, brush up on your work experience and your personal statement, and just make sure you can really talk about every aspect in that. But yeah, know your personal statement and your work experience, like the back of your hand. Make sure you can talk about every aspect of it, why it benefited you, and things of that sort. You can do that, the day before your interview. It shouldn't take that long because I imagine you would have already given this thought in writing your personal statement, why you think this makes you a good pick. But keep that in mind. And yeah, what unique interpretations can you draw from your work experience? That's something sort of a confidence booster which I had. I had long-term employed work experience as a carer during sixth form, and I knew that was like my silver bullet. If I can, bring that onto a question, I can talk about that for ages. Because what was unique about that is that compared to other work experience, I was usually directly involved in decision making for different clients, and this meant that I sort of already bared the responsibility, or some of the responsibility, of a healthcare professional in terms of how liable they are for their mistakes. And that was a massive confidence boost to me, knowing I had that work experience and I could treat it like a silver bullet if it was ever mentioned in the question. And then lastly, be polite, okay? I entered the interview smiling and I left the interview smiling, and I tried to be as amicable, joyful as possible. Again, these things might not be necessarily scored directly in your interview, but you don't know what role these sorts of subconscious things will have on your interview. So better to be safe and sorry, better to err on the side of caution. It doesn't hurt you to join smiling, be polite, leave smiling, say thank you, all of that stuff. And yeah, okay, now to the last part of the video. What do other content creators have to say about last minute interview advice? Really embarrassingly, it's on my phone, which I'm using to record on. So I have to put it up on my laptop, so just bear with me 2 seconds. Okay, as for what Aisha said, my eyesight's really bad, so I'm gonna have to be like glaring at my laptop as I read this. She said, I would genuinely say make sure you can answer why the student specifically questioned, because if your answer is bad, you are capitals cooked. And I definitely agree. I really wanted to go to Nottingham mainly for the sports programs, so I'd done research about it. Yeah, good advice from Aisha. Go check out her page. She posts on TikTok more than I do. She posts medicine, lifestyle stuff on TikTok if you want to check that out, as well as A-level, UCC, all of the whole shebang, as they say. So go check out her page. And then the next and last tip. This has taught me I need some connections in the medicine space because I only have 2 people to reach out to. The next tip is from Keem, unconventional medic, and this is what he had to say. As for interview advice, I think my biggest advice would be to not be robotic and be authentic to yourself. I think a lot of the time you feel pressure to fit into a typical medical student stereotype, but that just makes you look like a jerk. I'd say embrace what makes you different. Don't feel pressure to speak a certain way or come across as someone you're not. Be genuine, as long as it's professional. That is beautiful. That's just beautiful, isn't it? Again, going back to what makes you unique, it ties into that subconscious, bias of the interviewer. They hear things all the time, which in theory should score high marks, but if you can talk to them about something they've never heard before, why you think it's beneficial, like I like to say in my career example, that can definitely benefit your interview. And yeah, my interpretation of what Keem's saying, go check out his page if you want to know what he's actually saying, because maybe I'm just butchering this, but it's a lot easier to be yourself than be someone who you're not. So way to just take that pressure off the interview is coming at it from your own, your perspective. So thank you to Aisha and Keem for those tips as well. I'll work on my connections so that you guys can have more people in the videos. But with that being said, that's it for today's video. Thank you guys for watching, of course. But yeah, if you have any last minute questions which you urgently need answered, answer them here. I might turn them into another YouTube video, but I'll still answer you, directly on email first. And with that being said, thank you for watching.